Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara. Now, Srendra is talking about the to understand this phenomena of the one becoming the many. We have to. It becomes almost impossible for the mind to admit it. How can the one become the many? So, Srendra says that there are three premises that you have to hypothesis that you have to admit. And if you admit that, then it becomes very easy to understand. Don't stand absolutely rigidly in your logic and say that what is logic is the ultimate process of truth. You don't think like that. So the first thing he's saying that this Satchidananda which is there, it may be consciousness, it may be substance, it may be Ananda, it also may be force. But it is capable of taking various, it can vary itself. It can vary itself and stand on many, many. As we said yesterday, we were discussing that there are seven, you have a house of 7 floors, you are quite capable of remaining on the 7th floor or the 6th floor or the 5th floor or even the ground floor. This is the Satchidananda can do that. It can station itself at the highest level, it can station itself at the lowest level. Number one premise. Okay? A power of self-variation. I'll tell you all the three and then we'll read the para. The second possibility is it can take the self-variation. Okay? Although it stands on, it can take its stand on all the 7 levels, it can also vary its nature. It can become, it can vary its nature, become something other than what it is. Exactly, again, we go back to the famous example of water, ice, and water vapor. Essentially the same thing, varying itself in form. Okay, that's a number. The third one is the capacity to limit itself. Okay, that is the next one. These three principles, if we accept, then there is no difficulty in understanding how the one can become the many. This is basically what is used. Remember all the three. One, it can position itself at so many levels. Number two, it has the power to vary its nature. Okay, it can become something else than what it is. As we said, water, water vapor, and ice. Third, it can diminish itself. It has the power to either expand itself or concentrate itself into a smallness. Okay, it can become huge, it can become very limited also. So these three powers. So first one we have already read yesterday. I am reading from the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th line from the bottom. It says a free power of self-variation must be natural to the consciousness that is infinite. Okay? And he has told you earlier that it can be transcendent, it can be cosmic, and it can also be individual. The transcendent is the above, the cosmic is the in between, and below is the individual self. Now we read the next para, a second possibility. Okay? It's a huge para. Yesterday we decided that we do it today. So, who reads today?
Shall I read?
Yes, do that.
Okay. A second possibility of the infinite consciousness that must be admitted is its power of self limitation or secondary self formation into a subordinate movement within the integral, illimitable consciousness and knowledge. For that is a necessary consequence of the power of self determination of the infinite. Each self determination of the self being must have its own awareness of its self truth and its self nature. Or, if we prefer so to put it, the being in that determination must be so self aware. Spiritual individuality means that each individual self or spirit is a center of self vision and all vision. The circumference, the boundless circumference, as we may say, of this vision may be the same for all, but the center may be different, not located as in a spatial point in a spatial circle, but a psychological center related with others through a coexistence of the diversely conscious many in the universal being. Each being in a world will see the same world, but see it from its own self-being, according to its own way of self-nature. For each will manifest its own truth of the infinite, its own way of self-determination, and of meeting the cosmic determinations. Its vision by the law of unity, its variety, will no doubt be fundamentally the same as that of the others, but it will still develop its own differentiation. As we see all human beings conscious in the one human way of the same cosmic things, yet always with an individual difference. This self-limitation would be not fundamental, but an individual specialization of a common universality or totality. The spiritual individual would act from his own center of the one truth and according to his self-nature, but on a common basis and not with any blindness to other self and other nature. It would be conscious limiting its action. It would be conscious limiting its action with full knowledge, not a movement of ignorance. But apart from this individualizing self-limitation, there must also be in the consciousness of the infinite a power of cosmic limitation. It must be able to limit its action so as to base a given world or universe to keep it in its own order, harmony, self-building. For the creation of a universe necessitates a special determination of the infinite consciousness to preside over that world and a holding back of all that is not needed for that movement. In the same way, the putting forth of an independent action of some power like mind, life, or matter must have as its support a similar principle of self-limitation. It cannot be said that such a movement must be impossible for the infinite, but it is illimitable. On the contrary, this must be one of its many powers, for its powers too are illimitable. But this also, like other self-determinations, other finite buildings, would not be a separation or a real division, for all the infinite consciousness would be around and behind it and supporting it, and the spatial movement itself would be intrinsically aware not only of itself, but in essence of all that was behind it. This would be so inevitably in the integral consciousness of the infinite. But we can suppose also that an intrinsic, though not an active awareness of this kind, demarcating itself, yet indivisible, might be there too in the total self-consciousness of the movement of the finite. This much cosmic or individual conscious self-limitation would evidently be possible to the infinite and can be accepted by a large reason as one of its spiritual possibilities. But so far, on this basis, any division or ignorant separation or binding or blinding limitation, such as is apparent in our own consciousness, would be unaccountable.
Yeah. 1.5 page para, huge para. So let us see what he's talking about. Okay. I have told you basically what he's going to say in the 3 paragraphs. So you know what he's going to say. He's going to tell you that the power of Satchidananda, you have to assume 3 powers of Satchidananda. You have to understand. Self-variable oneness, infinite variation, although it does not change itself. Okay, so self-variation in oneness. Second, self-limitation. And the third one, self-absorption. Is putting slightly differently. Okay, self-absorption. In other words, it can concentrate only into itself. Okay? So these 3 are very interestingly related to the transcendental, the cosmic, and the individual. So let's see what he's saying. Self-absorption. In other words, it remains fully gathered into itself and it is not conscious of anything else. It does not want to be conscious of anything else. So obviously, what would this correspond to? The transcendent. The transcendent is without the universe. When you are in the transcendent consciousness, the universe does not exist for you. So what exists for you? Only your own consciousness. So this is the self-absorption. Okay? It does not allow any outward movement. So this is the transcendental. Then the second one, self-variable oneness. Okay? It is one at the same time, it is the many. So what would that be?
Cosmic.
That would be the cosmic. And the third power, self-limitation.
Individual.
That would be the individual. So this is the three powers that he's talking about. Okay, so we keep this in mind, and now we read the paragraph. Then we understand the word that he is using. Okay. A second possibility of the infinite consciousness that must be admitted. Admitted why? Because if you want to understand the one becoming the many, must be admitted, is its power of self-limitation or secondary self-formation into a subordinate movement within the integral, illimitable consciousness and knowledge. It is within, not interestingly, what he's saying. Okay? Look at the words carefully. When you go into details, it becomes a little difficult, but that's worth doing for sure, okay? Because then you really get nearer to the truth. At a mental level, maybe, but even then, that's good enough at our level. Okay, so must be admitted is power of self-limitation or secondary self-formation. It can take on something which seems to be other than itself, okay? Into a subordinate movement. No. Again, we come back to the idea of that water, which is the essential infinite consciousness, if you want. It can subordinate itself into ice, or it can subordinate itself into water, or into the water vapor. It's a subordinate movement. But the essential thing is the water. Water is common to all of them. Okay. So this, if you get the image, it becomes quite clear what he's saying. And these are subordinate movements. Water in its is the essential reality. It can take these three forms: the liquid form, the solid form, and the absolutely the subtlest of forms. So, subordinate movement. But where is this taking place? Is it doing it outside itself? No, it's doing it within itself, within the integral, illimitable consciousness and knowledge. So although it seems to be projecting itself outwards, it is yet within itself only, because nothing else exists except the divine. So this is what it is doing, within itself, although it seems to be outside. For that is a necessary consequence of the power of self-determination of the infinite. The infinite has the power to determine its own, make different forms of itself. The word determination is very simple. It means to give a form to itself. When you determine something, you are giving it characteristics. Okay? And these characteristics are not coming from outside. It is doing it to itself. It is itself modifying itself and making a different, giving a different form to itself. So that's what he's saying. Then we go to the next sentence. Each self-determination of the self-being, okay, must have its own awareness of its self-truth and its self-nature. Now let's understand what he's saying. Each self-determination, each form, the essential Satchidananda is giving a form to itself. And what is it making that form out of itself? It is making self-being. Self-being is a substance. Okay? So its own substance, it is giving it a form. Okay? Like if you want in the, if you think of matter as a substance, it can become a stone, it can become a mountain, it can become a plant, it can become an animal. Okay? So these are the determinations, and essentially it is matter. So self-being is matter and self-determination are the different forms. Okay? Must have its own awareness of its self-truth and its self-nature. So another thing, self-truth. That means It knows itself fully, and that is why it can mold itself. The water vapor and all these things, they know that I am water and I can do whatever I want with myself. It knows itself. Now the word self-truth and self-nature. Okay? Interesting. Self-truth would be the essence.
I think Rangada, this could be self-being and self-nature could be Swadharma and Swabhava.
Yes, that's right. Or Purusha Prakriti also. Yes.
Yes.
That's right. That's exactly what I was going to say. Okay. So one is the essence and the other is the downward. So Purusha Prakriti. Okay. The self-truth is at the highest level, self-nature at the lowest level. It can express itself through so many different ways. Nature. That's right. Okay. So this is it. So you see, the word self-truth and self-nature, if you start looking carefully, you start beginning. The truth is essentially one, but he uses different words. So exactly that is it.
But I think there could be a lot of fine distinctions. Like there is self-being.
Yeah.
Self-being is Swadharma. Self-nature is Swabhava. So self-determination and self-truth. There are 4.
Yeah, but essentially it means the same thing. The self-truth is the essence. Okay. You can make a small. There are differences as well as the oneness. So when we use words, we can make distinctions. It's quite true. Okay. But then we have to be a little more plastic in our approach. Self-nature. Just 1 second, I am making a note. Okay. So self-nature is the Prakriti and the yeah, Swabhava and Swadharma. You can say that, yeah.
And I think this self-determination can be Swarupa or something, the form.
Yeah, that's right. That is the quite right. So Swadharma. But there are small differences. But anyway, basically, if you want to make it simple, you can say that. Okay? So self-truth and self-nature. It knows itself fully and therefore it can take any form it wants. If it did not know itself fully and did not know what are these potentialities, how can it make itself into what it wants? It can't if it doesn't know itself. But it knows itself. Okay? That's right. Or if we prefer to put it, the being in that determination must be so self-aware. In other words, this substance, this sat that is there, that substance must be aware of itself. Just now in the morning, Jasmine was asking me about consciousness. So that is exactly this. Consciousness actually is the substance itself. Okay? It is matter that is conscious of itself. But this matter at the lowest level is seemingly unconscious. But at the highest level, this matter which is gross here becomes absolutely subtle and it is fully conscious of itself. Okay, so that's what it's really saying. If you want to put it that way, you can say that being in that determination must be self-aware. It must know itself. Okay, so now, spiritual individuality means that each individual self or spirit is a center of self-vision and all vision. Now again we have 2 words, self-vision and all vision. What does that mean? It means, and this is true of spiritual individuality as well as spiritual oneness. Okay? But the spiritual individuality means that each individual self or spirit, Jivatman, okay, the individual soul, is the center of self-vision and all vision. Self-vision, it knows itself inwardly. And all vision, it knows the universe. What it is producing, it knows itself. So you can see all the connectedness. Now, so using different words with slight differences and yet basically is the same. So center of self-vision, you would say self-truth. And all vision, what is it capable of producing? That would be self-nature. Okay. It is going out. Vision is going outwards. Self-vision is going inwards. Okay. So the essence and the variations. Now he is putting again different words. The circumference, the boundless circumference, as we may say, of this vision may be the same for all, but the center may be different. Okay. This is the individual. He is talking about the individual. The individual may be different. Okay, their nature may be different. That's exactly what we discussed in the Swabhava and Swadharma. Each soul is made in a different way. Essentially the same, but it can be different. And what it does, okay, ultimately when it goes out into the universe, the circumference, they are saying, the boundless circumference, as we may say, note the words, as we may say, because these things are very difficult to put into words. But the nearest we can approach, so that's what he's saying, we may say that, okay. So what just now also Gitanjali mentioned, that we can think of it in this way and that way and all. Again, you have to use the words as we may say, okay. So of this vision may be the same for all, but the center may be different. Not located in a spatial point in a spatial circle, but a psychological center related with others through a coexistence of the diversely conscious many in the universal being. This again, we can think of the spiritual individual. He is saying that there is a circumference as well as a center. So again, we can make it very graphic to ourselves by the image of the salt, a grain of salt and the salt in the sea. The salt in the sea is the circumference. Essentially, it is salt, but it has no form. Okay, it is everywhere, not in space and time as in the same. Okay, not in a spatial point or in a spatial circle, but a psychological center. So that grain of salt, if you remove all the form, color, shape, weight, size, then that is the spiritual center. And when it becomes the cosmic, it becomes essentially the salt remains the same, but without form, color, shape, size. Okay, so this is what he's saying. Maybe the same for all, but the center may be different. Not located in a special point in a special circle, but a psychological center related with others. The oneness is there everywhere through a coexistence of the diversely conscious many in the universal being. Each being in a world will see the same world, but see it from its own self-being, according to its own way of self-nature. Now this is interesting. Even if the two individuals are divine here, they may not necessarily see the same thing. They may see it differently, but they will not be clash. They will understand each other's point of view, but they will not clash, but they'll be different. That is the essence of the multiplicity. Okay. For each will manifest its own truth of the infinite, and the own truth of the infinite can also be infinite truths. So each one is one aspect of the truth in its own self-determination and of meeting the cosmic determinations. The self-determination, the individual, and the cosmic determination is the cosmic level. Remember the three levels. Its vision by the law of unity in variety will no doubt be fundamentally the same as that of others. That means the saltiness, if you want, is essentially the same. And what is the saltiness? Ultimately, Satchidananda. Okay, that is the saltiness, if you want. It's fundamentally the same for all others, but it will still develop its own differentiation. So to take the image further, each grain of salt can be quite different. Okay, it may be slightly a different shape. Okay, but essentially it is salt. Okay, as we see all human beings conscious in one human way of the same cosmic things, yet always with an individual difference. We are all conscious in a human way, Chandra is putting it in a very interesting manner, but each one is seeing something else. Okay, that's why there is so much of difference of opinion. Okay. This self-limitation would be not fundamental, but an individual specialization of a common universality or totality. So in other words, what he's saying is this differentiation is secondary. It is not a fundamental thing. This differentiation is of forms. The essence remaining the same. Again, you can picture to yourself the water behind the dam, okay? And that is the one, it is the same. Now you punch 100 holes in the dam, and each hole is letting out a stream of water, and each one is different. One may be a small hole, one may be a big hole, one may be a square hole, one may be a round hole. So when they are coming out, they are all taking different determinations. Characteristics are changing, but essentially it is the water. So this is what you do. That's what he's saying. We see that again. Okay, this self-limitation. The self-limitation is taking the form. Okay, and the nature would be not fundamental. It's not essentially different from each other. Not fundamental. But an individual specialization. The limitation would not be fundamental. That's what he's saying. It would be a secondary truth, not a fundamental truth. But an individual specialization of a common universality or totality. Now, this is very interesting what he's saying, because the Mayavadins see the limitation in the physical world, all the things that they see, they say has no reality at all. It is total illusion. Shyamsura does not agree. He says that the forms in the physical world are not fundamental. That I agree, he's saying. But he's saying it is not totally false. Okay? There is a truth to it, but it's a secondary truth. Okay? But an individual specialization of a common universality or totality. So there is the difference between the different philosophies, depending from which level you are seeing. But the Buddhists say the self-determination, the forms that you see in the physical world have no essential reality. You are seeing only the form and saying it is unreal. But why don't you see the essentiality of the form? Why don't you see the truth behind the form? And that's what we're saying, and Advaita also says the same thing. Okay? There is a relative truth. Okay? That's what the unreal reality also is one of the possibilities, depending on how you express it. So, the spiritual individual would act from his own center of the one truth and according to his self-nature, but on a common basis and not with any blindness to other self or other nature. And this is very interesting, and this is also very difficult to understand. Okay? It is not very easy to understand this, because if I give you an example, you might misinterpret. So I won't give an example, but take Mother and Sri Aurobindo, both are divine, but they are the self-determinations of one truth. One is into, as I told you, one is into painting and music. Okay? Totally different expression. And Sri Aurobindo is into knowledge and poetry and literature. So they will act differently in different places, but there will be no clash between them. Okay? Each will act in a different way. It's not something very secret, so I can speak about it, but I am afraid that you people might come to wrong conclusions. That's why it's difficult to speak about it, but it is open, it is there in the agenda. So I'll speak about it. Okay, so but you have to understand it with a suspended judgment. Okay, be very careful, because I know some people who have not understood it rightly. Okay, this is what he's saying. There is a oneness and there is also a difference. Okay, so the incident happened like this. There used to be a Muslim family that had come from Hyderabad. Okay, because Sir Akbar Haider, he was living opposite the playground. He was the, I think, the Prime Minister in the Hyderabad state at that time. And he had come, and his wife was French. So he had naturally a good relation with his mother, and he was living opposite the playground in the what is called Nantai. Upstairs he used to live. Now which is the museum, mother's museum. Okay. So he used to be there. So he had a sister and a brother. The brother, there are several brothers, all of them came here. There was Prashant, who used to, his name was Prashant, but he was a Muslim. He used to wash bananas in the dining hall. But he was an Oxford graduate. Okay, but he used to wash bananas in the dining hall. That was the work given to him. Then there was Rene. Rene also was he had a French name, but he was a Muslim. He used to bow down to mother on all knees and offer a rose to her, a red rose every day. Okay, I still remember those things. Then there was a sister, and that sister's name was Chinmay. Okay, but this Chinmay got possessed by wrong forces, and she used to act in very strange ways. Okay. See, the truth is very complex. That's why I'm telling you this, but you have to understand in the right way. And if you feel that there is something which you are not understanding or misinterpreting, please suspend judgment. Okay, that's very important. Okay, I'm repeating that constantly. So what happened one day? She was speaking things which she should not have spoken. Okay, she was very jealous of Pranabdha. Okay, because mother was lavishing a lot of attention on Pranabdha. So she spoke some things, and mother was quite annoyed, and she gave her a slap. Okay, so it is there in the agenda. Mother has revealed it, so there is nothing to keep it a secret. All of you have access to it. Then Sri Aurobindo told her, you should not have done that. Now, see the difference, okay? One is into force. Okay? But when mother is slapping somebody, it is not doing as we would do it. Okay? We would do it with anger, disturbance in the being, and we would do it with a little bit of a sense of enmity and disgust. Nothing of that will happen with mother. She is doing it as something necessary to do. Just like Sri Krishna is telling Arjuna, kill your own grandfather and your cousins and your in-laws. It doesn't matter. Okay? But be absolutely calm with him. But still, there was a difference of opinion. No? So, Sri Aurobindo was absolutely calm and quiet, and he would take it with an absolute. That's one aspect of the divine. The other aspect of the divine is power, energy, action. Okay? But based on truth. So this is what Sri Aurobindo is saying here, and that's what you have to understand.
Ranga,
Yeah, tell me.
I have something to. I have been thinking about this, and I was thinking that there are two approaches when one is stationed in the psychic and when one is stationed more in the Atman.
Okay.
So in the so I think I mean not that it can be said, but the wideness of the higher levels of the mind is where Sri Aurobindo was, and from there, you see everything very differently. But when you are engaged in getting things done, working, manifestation, like the mother, and from the psychic, so there is an involvement of a different kind than it is when you are from this Atman and that higher mental stages. Am I right?
Essentially, what you're saying is the same thing that I'm saying, but I would not necessarily attribute the differences to the self and the psychic. I wouldn't do that, because even the psychic, okay, it can be absolutely, it can act in a different way, and even the in the Gita, for instance, okay, in the Gita, what is Sri Krishna telling Arjuna? Go to the higher level where you are saying that there is everything quite different, but he is still advising action in the world, even to the extent of killing. So, what we are discussing is, yes, there is a difference as well as a there is a difference as well as a oneness. But you can't very, very, very mentally say one belongs to the psychic and one belongs to the self. I don't think that would be very correct. Okay. But
may I say something?
Yes, go ahead. Your image is there on the screen.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Since this lady was talking rubbish,
Yes.
she was just a puppet in the hands of the vital forces.
Absolutely correct.
And what the Divine Mother did was not slap the individual, but her force was such that she slapped the vital forces, the wrong vital forces, to
Exactly.
get rid of them from that person. So what she did was actually good for her.
Actually, what you're saying is the right thing, okay? But this is what she said, that I was not slapping her, I was slapping the force that was
Yes.
acting to her. Mother said that in the agenda, okay? She did say that. But yet, if you think of what Srendu is saying, that you should not have done the physical act, so would it be possible to do it without a physical act? Probably yes, with your spiritual.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was a difference in the action, but the nature of the action would be the same. Repulsion of the wrong force. Okay. So what Jasmine said just now is absolutely correct, because that's exactly what Mother said in the agenda also. Okay. But you are very likely to misunderstand the thing and give it a different color. That is what I am warning you against, because it's a very subtle thing and you have to understand exactly. So, okay, this is the what Srimli is discussing here in this para. That there is an essential reality and there is a difference in the self-determination.
Rangada, as you said, 1 minute. And Rangada, as you said, when we can't understand something, it is best not to be judgmental, not to try to
Yes,
understand it with our mental.
exactly. Suspend judgment. Okay, exactly. That is one of
There is a saying that one has to be cruel in order to be kind. Yes, and if you see, supposing as a doctor you have to examine a child, that child will not allow examination, especially of the eyes. So
Okay.
what you have to do? You have to pin that child down and then forcefully open the eye and examine. So I have to be cruel, but
Yes,
I'm being kind because
yes.
I have to help the child.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that is well put. Okay, so that's it. So, but yet it is in our ignorance we might make wrong decisions and wrong understanding of things. That is the reason why because this is a very difficult to understand at the mental level. But with a little stretch of imagination and a broadness of view, you can understand to a certain extent, but not fully. It's not possible to understand fully. Okay, so there were, yeah. Okay, so
Rangada, I wanted this clarification. I'm sorry, but what I meant was like when you are engaged, like Mother said, no, without him I exist not, without me is unmanifest.
okay,
So there's a power that is engaged in manifestation. That is the Prakriti, that is the Shakti, that is the mother.
yeah, okay,
So that is a very different approach than when you are like a strategist or like Sri Aurobindo, who's in the wider thinking, and that is a different approach to
okay,
compared to the mother. So when you are engaged in manifestation, and like I have heard from Sudadi, how mother would tell many times that the mosquito net should be very stretched, not hanging, or she would tell people how they should dress up, and if fourth, fifth time they didn't listen to it, then her Mahakali aspect would come, because she's engaged in action. It's like the mother of the house or the woman who's the executrix, who
okay.
has to engage with things. There is a certain power that is needed, and that is why I said the psychic, because psychic is involved in nature.
I wouldn't agree with that. What you are saying essentially is true, but I would eliminate the difference you are making between self and psychic. That I would say it doesn't correspond to the psychic and the self. It's a different truth altogether. At the highest level, it is one. At the lowest level, it is many. Just stick to that. I think that is more. I mean, you are fully within your rights to come to your own conclusions, but I would feel that it has nothing to do with the psyche and the self. The truth of the one becoming the many is not relevant to the self and the psychic. The self is infinite, the psychic is individual. That's about the only correspondence. And the individual can act in different ways. But we were discussing the different ways. So if you mean that way, yes, each psychic being can act in a different way. Even when you are in the self, okay, even when two people are in the self, In the physical world, they will act in a different way. Even if the psychic is not in front, they'll be acting in a different way. Okay, so as I said just now, there is a truth even in what you are saying, but there are slight variations, and that is the whole problem with our limited mind. Any statement that it makes is giving it a very definite form and shape and color. That is where the problem arises. Okay, so one has to be a little flexible in here. So while admitting what you are saying, yet something with a little bit of a reservation. Okay, so that is what it is. Okay, what's the time? 31. So we have a little more to finish. So let's finish what he's saying. We'll finish the chapter. Okay, so now the spiritual individual would act from his own center of one truth and according to his self nature, but on a common basis and not with any blindness to other self and other nature. It would understand the others and yet act in a different way. Okay, it would be consciousness limiting its action with full knowledge, not a movement of ignorance. But apart from this individualizing self-limitation, there must also be in the consciousness of the infinite a power of cosmic limitation. That means the really a limitation. It's not it's a pretension, it's a real limitation. It must be able to limit its action so as to base a given world or universe and to keep it in its own order, harmony, self-building. For the creation of a universe necessitates a special determination of the infinite consciousness to preside over that world and a holding back of all that is not needed for that movement. So this is an interesting phrase, and we can discuss that to a certain extent, but you two will be very brief about it. A holding back of all that is not needed for that movement. The movement itself is infinite, the consciousness. But when it wants to produce one particular consciousness, it produces the consciousness which is relevant to that particular nature, which is limited. But it puts away all the rest. So in its individual action, it varies. That's what he's saying. It's a holding back of all that is not needed for the action. In the same way, the putting forth of an independent action of some power like mind, life, matter, must have as its support a similar principle of self-limitation. Okay? So it cannot be said that such a movement must be impossible for the infinite because it is illimitable. The power to limit itself applies to Sat, Chit, Shakti, Ananda. On the contrary, this will be one of its many powers, for its powers too are illimitable. But this also, like other self-determinations, other finite buildings, he is using the word buildings, or each form is built, okay, would not be a separation or a real division, for all the infinite consciousness would be around and behind it. Okay, so around, cosmic, behind it, the essence, and supporting it, and the special movement itself would be intrinsically aware not only of itself, but in essence of all that was behind it. It is conscious of the center of the circle and also the circle, the circumference of the circle. That's what it is. This would be inevitably in the integral consciousness of the infinite. But we can suppose also that an intrinsic, though not an active awareness of this kind, demarcating itself, yet indivisible, might be there too in the total self-consciousness of the movement of the finite. So, in other words, the finite also contains the infinite in itself, although it may not show it, but it is inherent in it. This much cosmic or individual conscious self-limitation would evidently be possible to the infinite and can be accepted by a larger reason. That's what exactly we have been discussing. Your reason should not be narrow and rigid. It should be a larger reason. It must be wide-minded. So at our level, we can't always be wide-minded. In any case, you can't be wide-minded spiritually. So better to suspend judgment. Okay, larger reason. as one of its spiritual possibilities. But so far, on this basis, any division or ignorant separation or binding and blinding limitation, such is apparent in our own consciousness, would be unaccountable. In other words, this oneness and difference in a spiritual individual, there would be no binding or blinding limitation. In other words, there will be no ignorance. Neither there is ignorance in mother, nor there is ignorance in Sri Aurobindo, and yet they are acting in a different way. That's exactly what he's saying. So this is the power of limitation, self-limitation. It can limit itself and become different and yet essentially remain the same. So we stop here today, and next time we'll go to the third power, next one. But a third power of possibility is plunging into itself. Okay, that's an interesting thing that we will see. So this will only be next week, because tomorrow we are doing something else. So this will be next week. So I'm putting.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rangada.
Remember what I told you about the misinterpretation? What a third power.
Thank you, Rangada.
Okay.